Welcome everyone to our panel today, which is going to be on responsible reporting on anti-trans violence. We're thrilled to have this conversation with you at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, which of course is a focal point for not only anti-trans laws and anti-trans violence, and there's a relationship between those things which we can help unpack and discuss as well. And also a place where, because of the way in which trans people are often portrayed, it contributes to the atmosphere of violence, physical violence, policy violence, cultural violence, and in all of the ways that people can be attacked. And we know that the media has a really important role in shaping the way issues are framed and shaping the way that people think. And it's the feeling on every single person on this panel that if you can move those two things, that they can have a direct impact on increasing the safety and the strength of ability for us to live long, productive, and healthy lives. Because trans people are only 1% of the population, it means that we have to be even more reliant on the ability of media and journalism in all of its forms to portray us in a way so that people can get to know us and understand that we are human beings and deserve the same human rights as everyone. So what we are going to do today is to show the way in which media portrayals of us and the way that we are reported on in both the political, mainstream, and entertainment press directly impact our safety. And we'll also talk about ways that we believe that the reporting on us in those various spheres of journalism can be improved and what action people can take in order to help make us safer. We're going to talk for about 35-40 minutes to kind of start the conversation and let you all know what we are thinking, and then move to questions from you all, which will be a really valuable and enriching part of this conversation. So we just want to thank you for joining us. I'm going to start with introductions and then we'll move to the conversation. My name is Amara Jones. I am the founder and CEO of Translash Media, which is a journalism and nonprofit storytelling organization which uses the power of narrative in order to center the humanity of trans people. And we do so with the very direct idea that the power of storytelling and by centering our humanity is a way to decrease violence against trans people, because we believe at Translash that the ignorance about our communities is what contributes to our lack of well-being. And we do so in a variety of ways. We do so through video, including documentaries, short documentaries, animated films. We do so through, now we have 3 podcasts. One just launched on Thursday, just yesterday, called The Mess. It's a political podcast. We do so through zines. We do so through a variety of media. And at Translash, what we say is that we tell trans stories to save trans lives. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm thrilled as a part of my work to be in conversation with everyone here. And I'm just going to tell you who all of these amazing people are, because each of them could be a panel by themselves and in their own right. The first person to my left is Serena Jasmine. Serena is a senior digital manager at the Transgender Law Center. Serena is also a journalist, having been a correspondent at Condé Nast, as well as at Mike, which is where we first met all those years ago. Who's counting? Serena also has a TikTok, Serena Jasmine, on brand, which seeks to talk about the reality of trans people, both in terms of politics and what's happening to us, and as well as centering our humanity. Next to Serena is Eva Rain. Eva is a GLAAD and Peabody Award-winning actress, as well as journalist, having written for imprints like Vogue, Vice, as well as Translash. And then Eva is also the star of Anything's Possible on Amazon Prime. So for all of you Prime subscribers, you know we get Prime Video as a part of that. So it's real easy to go there and type in Anything's Possible, where you can see Eva's work. One piece of work, Eva's work, so we're thrilled to have Eva here. And then last but not least is Ariel Rebecca, who is a communications consultant at the Transgender Law Center. And also, I'm gonna get this very right. Ariel is the founder of Trans and Caffeinated. I mean, so many things you can do with that brand, right? So the trans flag, and on a coffee mug, there are all these ideas I'm getting. Founder of Trans, it's not my job, but I'm coming up with branding ideas. Founder of Trans and Caffeinated Consulting, which offers communications and advocacy support to progressive organizations and anyone who wishes to inject those perspectives in their work. Please welcome our panelists today. One of the things that I wanted to start you all with in terms of contextualization is to show just how much stereotypes, disinformation, and the misrepresentation of trans people has funneled into the mainstream ideas of America, and specifically mainstream journalism. And we know that if it's there, it's everywhere. It is literally, as the Pop Culture Collaborative says, is the ocean that we are swimming in. It is the narrative ocean that we are swimming in, and gives context to what we're going to talk about today. At Translash, we have a group of investigative journalists that since 2020 has been working to unpack the people, the money, the organizations that are driving anti-trans hate and subsequently anti-trans violence in the country. And their work is encapsulated in a podcast that we have, an investigative series that we have called The Anti-Trans Hate Machine: A Plot Against Equality. And each season we take a different look at what's driving that violence in these bills. And most recently, we had an entire season that was devoted to the media and to the media landscape. And the penultimate episode of that podcast focused on the New York Times and the way in which misrepresentations, disinformation, stereotypes about trans people have made their way into the New York Times, and how that is being weaponized against trans people. For people who don't want to spend an hour and 10 minutes with that episode listening to it online, we've also developed a 2.5-minute animation which encapsulates some of the main points. So we're going to start today by looking at that video and then dive into this conversation.
Today I'm going to explore how Abigail Schreier, someone with no real scientific or medical credentials.
That's what you got? Okay. Okay, we're gonna skip the video. We're gonna skip the video because we clearly sent the wrong one. But essentially what we show is how the New York Times has essentially decided to become a repository for anti-trans information by centering the conversations of pseudoscientific groups like the American College of Pediatricians, by uplifting discredited, disgruntled Christian nationalist parents who say that their kids are being trans as a result of social contagion, and also by listening to other various discredited voices, and I mean discredited scientifically, who support these ideas about transness essentially not being real. And we know that those representations that are in the New York Times are actually being quoted in the various state capitals across the country as a legitimizing factor for anti-trans bills. And we know that in those states, that whenever those bills are discussed, that that the cause of to suicide hotlines of trans and other queer youth shoot through the roof, which means that there's a very clear connection between the media landscape, these bills, and violence that trans people face. And one of the most stark examples of that we have recently, although it is clearly not the only one, is Next Benedict. And Next Benedict lives in a state in which they have increasingly passed laws to erase and make schools hostile to trans youth, and their murder shows the consequence of that. And that's on top of the violence that trans people face overall. The fact that for several years in a row, we've had record-breaking years of murders of trans people in this country. And what's most stark about a lot of those murders is that the people who kill trans people don't believe that they've done anything wrong. And they don't believe that they've done anything wrong because they live in a world where they receive messages that trans people are fake, not real, and therefore not human, and don't even deserve the basic ability to breathe. In some of these cases, when you read about these murders, the men that commit them will literally wait for the police because they don't believe that they've done anything wrong. And so what we want to do is to talk about the messages that people are receiving that allow them to commit these extreme acts of violence in all of the ways. And so first I want to talk to Hugh, Serena, who understands kind of the digital landscape in great detail, but also has been a reporter in newsrooms. And can you just give a sense of what the conversations are like about trans people that leads to some of these misrepresentations?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been working in different newsrooms for a decade now, starting at the Huffington Post, Mike, Slate, Condé Nast. So I've gone from a period where newsrooms didn't care at all about trans issues, and the trans community was underreported on. And now what we're seeing is a saturation of coverage about our community, right? But as we all know, visibility without protection is a curse, and it's also ultimately detrimental because we're seeing, like you mentioned, legacy publishers, some of the most storied brands in journalism, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, amplifying anti-trans rhetoric that the data shows has a direct through line to acts of anti-trans violence being committed. So I think a lot of times when publishers like the New York Times are covering the trans community in this way, maybe they think that it's a good business decision because for better or for worse, people are invested in our community right now. You know, across political leanings, across beliefs, people really want to read and consume news about the trans community. And so, in a way, these publishers are capitalizing on it, but they're actually doing themselves a disservice in the long run because in order to build sustainable journalism around the trans community, you have to build a through line to the community. You have to develop trust. And what they're doing is breaking trust because we take notice of the publishers that are reporting sensitively and responsibly about our community, and we take notice about the ones who don't. And we become more reluctant to speak to them when incidents happen. We tell our community members not to trust these journalists, these reporters, and it erodes trust over time. And so, you know, as reporters, I think we should care about finding solutions to end anti-trans violence because it's the morally and ethically responsible thing to do, but I know publishers don't always care about that. So it's also, if they don't care about that, should be an incentive to them from a business model perspective to start responsibly reporting on the trans community because when they erode trust, they're basically building a wall between themselves and a community that they're relying on right now to meet their KPIs, their page views, you know what I mean? So I think another issue is that legacy publishers like the New York Times are using their opinion sections as a way to just amplify and platform blatant anti-trans personal essays from people who just dislike trans people. And so they're giving legitimacy to views that are completely have been debunked by science. And by medical professionals. And so I think this is especially troubling in an era where we're seeing publications that are actually reporting on the trans community in ways that are accurate, like BuzzFeed and the Huffington Post and Vice being completely shuttered, their newsrooms gutted. So it's like the space that's being occupied by journalists who actually want to report on the trans community in ways that are beneficial is shrinking, and now it's leaving this huge space for publishers who don't care about our community to basically say whatever they want without any resistance. So that's why I encourage journalists who have been laid off or who are looking to pivot in a different direction to start a Substack, to start a TikTok account, to start a podcast, to find ways to tell these stories in ways that circumvent the legacy media world, because they're going to filter our ideas and they're going to filter trans voices. And so I ultimately think that's going to be one of the long-term solutions.
Eva, given your unique role as having been in the world of mainstream journalism and now in the world of entertainment and Hollywood, I'm wondering what you see as the echoes between what you see the way in which media coverage and mainstream press happens and how it actually influences how Hollywood sees us and therefore the roles that people are offered or the stories that get told.
That's a good question. I'm just kind of sitting with it. I'm like, Well, you know, one thing that Hollywood does is Hollywood does chase the money, right? So pretty much any time that Hollywood sees that there is a group of people that is trendy, you know, that's like starting to pick up steam, that is when we start to see that reflected back in shows and films, or even music. You know, I think one thing that, so with like trans narratives, oddly enough, Hollywood was kind of one of the arenas that we started to see more positive representation, while that wasn't always the case. You know, like, I mean, if we look back at like what was happening, pretty much anything like pre-2012 was pretty negative when it comes to trans rep, right? The more that we started to see different activists speak up and people slowly started to change their views on us, that is when we started to see more trans roles on television, which, you know, they weren't perfect, they were kind of clunky, and I think part of that is Hollywood saw that there was something that was eye-catching about us, and they wanted to use that to garner more attention, to garner more views, to kind of have this like wow factor to all of their programs. They really suffered through all of that, and trans writers did also. But, you know, thanks to people like Laverne, who were able to really like push through that, we then started to see this shift where there was more positive representation of us. There was more holistic representation of us also, that kind of went beyond just like the coming out story and, you know, talk around like what body parts we have, but actually talked about who we are as people. You know, and like that led to shows like Pose, that led to us seeing trans people just a part of people's everyday lives on screen, whether that was Elliot Fletcher on Shameless, or Ian Alexander on Star Trek, and you know, and now we're slowly starting to see more starring roles, such as Trace Lissette and Monica, me with Anything's Possible and Prime. we're starting to see this shift, but it is slow. I do think it's steady. And I think that Hollywood is kind of like one of the few mediums that we have to really show ourselves in a positive light. After, like the shuttering of several newsrooms, now that there are a number of trans people who do have strong platforms, who are on talk shows, like going on there and talking about their lives, or on TikTok or on Instagram, like we have other ways to show our voices and show who we are. But yeah, it gets tricky with Hollywood. I think Hollywood, they don't quite know how to always cast us in things because they don't really understand who we are. They just know that they want to see trans people in different roles. But oftentimes when I get a breakdown for stuff, it's not quite clear like what kind of trans person they're looking for. It can be super broad. Even from like the age to like the look. Whereas with any other casting that isn't trans specified, it'll say like they want like a white guy with blonde hair who's like really buff or whatever. But then when it comes to trans people, it can just be as broad as like trans/genderqueer person ages 18 to 50. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like what exactly are you searching for? So I think there's a lot of ways in which people are slowly becoming educated on us, even with like the negative stories that we've seen from from the early odds. There's lots of people who actually saw something positive in that, and it did shift how they viewed us. It made them think twice about how they interact with trans people. So every little thing does count. But I think the biggest thing that we can always do is to really make sure that we're telling our stories accurately, and make sure that the people who call themselves our allies, but they are also holding themselves to a higher standard on how they show how they show up for us.
Yeah, I think one of the questions, it's interesting because you're saying that the roles are trickling in and they're slightly getting better, but then you can have a situation where, someone like Dave Chappelle is suddenly platformed, and then, with anti-trans rhetoric, they, have the biggest streams of that year on Netflix. And so it's the way in which, even though there are these trickle of roles, you're still, contesting the images of trans people that still can garner huge audiences, right?
Absolutely. Because transness is it can be such a spectacle to different people, and I think that is where a lot of the draw comes from, especially when it comes to trans women. We have always been the most visible because people are very caught up on the whole notion of what makes a woman appear attractive, what makes her appear not attractive, all these things. And so, even when we turn on very very far right media, like Fox News, they're typically focusing on trans women, and they're focusing on us entering the bathroom and us entering sports, and when you go on when you go online, you see the major impact of all these negative ideals and notions that are being output, with people very much focusing on this whole idea of like a man being in the bathroom, or a man being in a dress, or whatever. All of it's false. All of it is. It's all fueled by people who probably don't know us, or maybe they do. Or maybe they do know us in a very personal way. We've seen that multiple times. But people who have the most to say about us are also the same ones who are hitting us up in our Instagram messages in the middle of the night, right? Whether on Tinder or whatever dating app, and they also are turning around and trying to save face by being so adamantly anti-trans. And it is this big question of why are you so concerned with us? Why is there such a big spectacle of us in journalism? Because that gets clicks, right? That gets lots of clicks, that gets lots of traffic. I think there's, I don't have a through line of burn to go on with all of this. But I think when it comes to the spectacle, that sadly is what has garnered more roles for us in Hollywood. That is also what has generated more storylines for us. And it also gives us so much more to push back against, and I think that's why, the fact that we all make our own media, that we all are showing our faces and being proud of who we are, that is such a powerful thing. Yeah. Because in this world with so much propaganda around our very being, it can be very easy for trans, for trans folks to feel that we can't even walk outside our front door because we think that people are going to put this camera up to our face. We've seen this on social media, we see it in the news, and yeah, I think the more that we just keep generating and the more that we keep showing up for ourselves first and foremost, the more we will see a positive change in hopefully people like Dave Chappelle and all those other people who probably do have a fetish for us, for being totally honest. The more we can get them to shut up and mind their own damn business. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that as Trace said, this famous TikTok framed Dave Chappelle, it's getting client.
Yeah.
So it's getting client, Dave Chappelle's rants. Rebecca, I want you to help take us to two places where you know a lot about. The first is the way that anti-trans violence is reported in local newsrooms. Whew. And specifically in relationship to the murders of trans people, specifically Black trans women. So take us into the things that they're getting wrong and how those portrayals are harmful and what's wrong, and then some of the thoughts you have about ways that, especially in local news, where and how things can change.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. So I think what's so interesting about reporting on anti-trans violence is there's basically this one Facebook group called Trans Violence News, where all of the conversations, all of the initial reports about incidents of anti-trans violence begin. And so it basically is Sue Kerr of Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondence or a couple of other folks will post that they heard about an incident that happened somewhere in the US, somewhere around the world. It is a global group. And basically all of the conversations of anti-trans violence start in that group. Often what we will see is the way that folks in that group pick up on incidents of anti-trans violence in local media is by having some like really awful Google alert set. So like man in a dress, presenting as female, like all these things, all these little buzzwords that we see in local newsrooms where we know that these are buzzwords indicating that generally transgender women or trans people more broadly are being gendered. These are the buzzwords that folks in that group use to monitor local incidents of anti-trans violence, which is really freaking telling that that is how we pick up on these local incidents. And so to answer your question, you know, often there are all of these indicators that local newsrooms either intentionally ignore that indicate someone, a victim of violence, was trans, or just lack the expertise, understanding, or desire to pick up on these indicators. And I think, unfortunately, it is often the first. It is often this intentional lack of respect for transgender people, because you know, how I got my start in this work was one of the things that I was doing was reaching out to local reporters and saying, hey, we picked up on this incident of anti-trans violence. I have noticed that you have misgendered this person. I've noticed you called him a man in a dress. I've noticed that you used a photo from before they transitioned. And as you know, as a reporter, you should care that this is inaccurate. And that was sort of how I got my start in responding to anti-trans violence, was reaching out to journalists to get them to correct inaccurate reporting. And the reason I think it is intentional is because 9 times out of 10, they would respond to me, if they responded at all, and say, sorry, my newsroom guidelines say that I have to report what was on this person's ID, or I have to report what the police are saying this person's gender is. And no matter how many times I push back on this, no matter how many times I try to offer them guidelines for how to improve their strategy on reporting about trans people, there was very little shift. And we're starting to see some of that with, you know, there are some more sort of like progressive local news outlets, even in more right-wing states. Like even in Texas, there are a couple local publications that are doing a much better job reporting on anti-trans violence.
Can you just name them really quickly?
Oh my God, it's escaping me right now. But they're the Texas. I can't remember right now. But there are a number of local papers that have popped up, like dedicated to telling progressive stories within more right-wing states. And if I remember it, I'll name it. But you know, by and large, it does seem like an intentional lack of respect for transgender people. And so there becomes this over-reliance on people like Sue Kerr, Pittsburgh lesbian correspondents, to be the one to correct all of these stories. And you know, there was a 6-week period of time where Sue was dealing with a personal problem in the fall, and there were like 10 incidents of anti-trans violence that came up over that 6-week period of time that either weren't reported on at all or were reported on so disrespectfully without any regard for trans people's lives. And because of this like over-reliance on this one Facebook group that maybe had like 20 of us active in it at any given time, unless people in that group are responding to it and doing this work, most of whom are doing it without being paid, local news gets carte blanche to say whatever they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that is interesting, sadly, about local news reporting is not only do they do everything that you said, misgendering, using the wrong photos, all the rest of it, dead naming, you know, all the things that, I mean, should be utterly unthinkable in this age. But it is also the case that they rarely actually report on the people who have died as human beings. So they talk about where they lived, how they died, what the police are doing about it, and quotes from local officials. They rarely have things about, this is where this person worked, this is who loved them, this is what their friends and family are saying about them. Like, they don't actually center them as human beings, which is kind of standard for other stories of people who were murdered. Like, you center the person who was murdered as if they're a human being, and then the other things are around that. And that's one of the most glaring absences for me in the reporting on trans people and trans death.
Yeah, and I think that this is so interesting that you bring that up, because I mean that's in y'all all have these journalist guides on your seats, and these the anti-trans violence one we just came out with in September at TLC, and Serena and I worked on that together. And that is one of the things that we really see so often is this this lack of reporting on who trans people were in their lives, and what that leads to is a lack an inability of folks reading these stories to actually comprehend that trans people are human beings, and this person that died was a person that had family, friends, loved ones, coworkers, that they were a human being, and it just perpetuates the dehumanization that perpetuates anti-trans violence, because if you don't see trans people as human beings, similar to any other group that gets dehumanized, we're seeing this with Palestinians in Gaza right now. If we see the repeated dehumanization of a group of people over time, then it is very difficult to get the general public to become invested in finding solutions to the conditions that place them in harm's way. And so it feels sometimes intentional or intentional lack of a desire to do it differently, where local newsrooms are just not reporting on who trans people were in life, probably because they aren't personally invested in finding solutions to violence. They're just like, well, this is a breaking news piece of a murder of this person that I don't care about, and so I'm going to report on it as such. When the reality is, one of the biggest indicators of, one of the biggest factors that increases empathy for any group of people is portraying them as human beings with full, robust lives and experiences. And we see when, trans lives tell trans stories and tell trans lives, well, that increases empathy for transgender people and pushes the needle forward, because if more folks are invested in finding solutions to anti-trans violence and solutions to violence impacting all of our communities, then we as a collective have the power to shift the narrative and to shift the conditions that place us in harm's way. But if local media and media outlets by and large continue dehumanizing trans folks, continue, platforming groups like the freaking ABF as quote-unquote experts, when their whole lane is targeting and increasing hate towards transgender people, then it becomes really difficult to push the needle forward in our favor.
Yeah, it reminded me of, there was a gruesome murder, I think it was 3 years ago, of Dominique Remy-Fells, a black trans woman in Philadelphia, whose murder was among the most extreme that I've ever heard of. And if you read the details, I'm not going to recount them, but they are almost in the realm of Dahmer, right? Like, it's wild what happened to her in every single way. And I spoke to her mother about it, and her mother was never included in any of the articles that was written about her before she died, right? Like, and she was like, the world never knew that my daughter had a job, that she had a mom that loved her, that she had a family that supported her. The world never knew that about her. And the second thing I asked her was, on this issue of humanity, I said, if you could be in a room alone with the person who murdered her, what would you say to him? And she said, the thing that I would say to him is that my daughter was loved, right? That she was a person. And that was so poignant to me. And that shows you what's absent in everything that you're saying. What do you think are some of the solutions, before we kind of move to the questions, what do you think are some of the solutions? Because you've also done a lot of thinking in terms of the guide that you all have worked on.
Solutions in terms of reporting solutions.
Yeah. So how do you, what are the things you think that journalists can do to improve?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is always talking to trans people, always talking to family members of trans people. You know, the sort of soundbite framing of nothing about us without us. Every story about trans lives, whether that is about anti-trans violence, anti-trans legislation, should always include trans voices and should always include the voices of those most impacted. And so we know that poor and low income families of trans youth are more impacted by anti-trans legislation because the ability to relocate out of state is significantly lower. We know that Black and disabled trans youth face increased barriers to accessing healthcare, and so really thinking through not just about including trans people in general in reporting, but thinking through, okay, the issue that I'm reporting on is such and such thing. So, if it's healthcare, okay, I know that ableism in healthcare, especially in the era of the COVID pandemic, prevents disabled and immunocompromised people in general from accessing healthcare because masks are not mandated in healthcare anymore. How do I bring that angle into reporting on gender-affirming healthcare, knowing that disabled and immunocompromised trans youth can no longer access healthcare for now multiple reasons, because of ableism in healthcare and because of transphobia in healthcare. It is asking those questions of what is the story I'm telling, who are those most impacted even within the trans community, and how do I access those spokespeople. And I think one of the recommendations that I would give is that Transgender Law Center, one of the things that we do is connect journalists with spokespeople who can speak on certain issues. And one of the series that we are launching in 2024 and 2025 is a series of webinars aimed at increasing familiarity with spokespeople around certain specific issue areas, being anti-trans violence, medical bans, athletics, disability justice, and reproductive justice, and Christian nationalism, to name 6. And so, increasing familiarity with spokespeople who can speak on issues, and if you aren't able to connect directly with a spokesperson or don't know someone offhand, connecting with an organization like Transgender Law Center or your local Equality Federation representative organization or local ACLU to connect with spokespeople who can add the personal angle to the story you're telling, because we've been talking about, that personal connection, that humanization is what will push the needle for your readers in favor of solutions towards violence, with regards to violence towards trans people, not just like fatal anti-trans violence, but anti-trans legislation, but harassment, but what happened to next Benedict, right? Like, these are the stories that we need to tell, including trans people, to increase the empathy necessary to end violence towards our communities.
I would also add that, in addition to the TLC resources, that there are lots of other resources with regards to style guides for how people can write about these. So the Trans Journalists Association has a style guide. The National LGBTQ Journalists also has a style guide. I know that at the New York Times, a lot of the journalists there were actually pushing for various parts of those to be incorporated into the way that that paper covers trans people. So the point here is that the things that journalists need to do are not a mystery, right? This is not like, trying to figure out how to land on the polar axis of the moon, which is really hard. I don't know if you've seen the two things, but they both ended up upside down. So it's a really hard thing to do. But this is not that hard. You actually have tons of resources to be able to tell you how to cover these things accurately. And so the point here is to urge people to actually use the things that are out there. This is not rocket science, and this is something that all of us have done in our jobs, all of us do routinely. It's something that's kind of not that hard. So I'm wondering if we can start to take time for questions. We may have 15 minutes or so for that. If not, I can keep going.
I'm pretty sure it's Texas Tribune, but don't
Okay, say it.
Texas Tribune. I'm
Texas
pretty sure that is what I'm talking about, but I can verify later.
So the microphone is here, and please come up if anyone has any comments or reflections.
I can ask a question.
Do you mind going to the mic?
What are you hopeful about in regards to trans journalism in the future?
Sure, that's a great question because I think it's easy with everything going on right now to feel defeated, and I know a lot of us in media and journalism and comms are feeling that constant burnout, that fatigue of logging online and seeing a news alert about one of our brothers, sisters, or siblings being murdered again or being a victim of anti-trans violence. I'm hopeful about creating a journalistic environment where the rules on reporting about anti-trans violence
Sorry.
that the rules go that the rules go beyond don't misgender, don't dead name. Like these are table stakes, right? These are the bare minimum of what we need to be doing. As reporters, our goal is to find the truth. Okay, and I think one of the biggest issues is that, and we talk about this in our journalist guide at Transgender Law Center, there's a need to push the framing beyond individual incidents of violence. As journalists, we need to zoom out and we need to connect the dots and find the extrapolations, find the connections between the acts of violence that are happening, because incidents of anti-trans violence don't happen in a vacuum, right? There's a context beyond them. What are the conditions, the societal ills, the societal failings, the conditions that create an environment where violence against trans people is so pervasive? I'm talking about a lack of equitable housing, a lack of employment opportunities, a lack of accessible health care. These are the conditions and we need to name them. So I see a lot of anti-trans violence very much fixated on numbers. You know, the 15th trans person to be killed in 2024. And while it's important that we track, you know, the pervasiveness of the violence, we also need to address the underlying currents that enable this violence to happen so regularly. Because unless we name those larger issues, those looming issues, then we're not going to really be able to guide readers towards the solutions. And I think that's what the goal of journalism should be right now. I mean, it's interesting because I've reported a lot on anti-trans violence in my career, and in 2020, I kind of went from reporting on this story to being this story because I was attacked on the subway in New York City, and like the very next day it went viral and it blew up, and journalists were hounding me about, you know, to get a quote or some sort of blurb, a traumatic incident, and I felt like journalists were trying to sensationalize it, you know, speaking about what I was wearing, what I was saying, what I maybe had done to contribute to this act of violence happening. So we also need to shift away from victim-blaming narratives, because when a non-trans person is killed, we never go, what did they do to deserve that? What did they say? What were they wearing? And so I think when we're able to focus on the systemic issues instead of focusing on what the victim did to deserve this horrible act, that's when we'll get to a place of really solid reporting around these issues.
What do you hope about?
In regards
And to the future of transporting, what do you hope about?
Right, sorry, I was listening to you. What am I hopeful about? I'm hopeful that even with like the rise in anti-trans rhetoric in media, there's also a rise in trans people on social media, right? Like, I think now we've never seen this many trans people visibly online talking about their lives, talking about what they go through. That's like honestly how I got my start. Like I would post on Instagram, and then people would find me through whatever hashtag, and I was able to connect to other people in media. That's how I learned who you were. I read all of your stories from way back when, and seeing you gave me a lot of hope. And I thought, okay, I guess there is some kind of avenue for me to tell my own story, right? And at first I thought, who cares about me? I'm just like some random girl from Missouri. But the more I was sharing, the more people did care. With that, it can be tricky because I do think there are a lot of trans youth who, I think they're sharing a little too much online. I do want to just kind of just turn off your phones at times. I'm like, you're saying too much, and the whole world doesn't need to know all these things about your life, you are a kid, and I think you should really try to hold on to that youth and your own right to privacy. But the fact that we do have the power to be our own voice, that also makes all of this legacy media, that makes them think twice about what they say when they know that someone has the platform to totally call them out on it, right? A lot of journalists who have been transphobic, they've tried to push back by saying, oh no, you're trying to weaponize your platform against me. That's what happened when I think it was Piers Morgan who interviewed Janet Mock back in 2014. Yeah. And yeah, he tried to go off on her. And he just kind of showed his own colors, and the evidence was there. There was no denying what his true intentions were in that moment. And I think it's very sad what happened to Janet in that moment. She did not deserve to go through that trauma. At the same time, that is a great example of the power that we do have thanks to the internet and thanks to a growing number of people who actually have empathy for who we are and are seeking to really understand us as best as they possibly can. So I think that's what has me really excited. We're seeing more and more people with that power.
Mm-hmm. What are you hopeful about?
Yeah, have you all seen how trans Gen Z and Gen Alpha are? It's a sight to behold, and I think that, we're seeing these, old schooly journalists in legacy publications, they still have this sort of, stronghold on media, and that will continue to fade, and that is going to fade as Gen Z and Gen Alpha enter newsrooms, gain more power within journalism. Because one of the biggest, things we need is more trans and trans-friendly folks in newsrooms telling these stories. And because of the shift in values, even from millennials to Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the shift is inevitable, right? We are doing this work because it's important and because we need to bring the movable middle in our generations along. We can't completely see the ground among folks that aren't telling great stories now. We can't just wait for Gen Z and Gen Alpha to come up into newsrooms. But I do think the shift towards support and affirmation for trans people in newsrooms is a tidal wave waiting to happen because of the young voices that are coming up into newsrooms over the next now through the next 5-10 years.
Any other questions? We have time for maybe one more before we wrap up.
Hi, my name's Anne, and I am a local Austin photojournalist and creative portrait photographer. I am here to represent a story of someone that I'm working with that has gone through cancer surviving through the discovery of top surgery. And I just am hoping to make a connection because there's an amazing story. I've been working with this person now for 6 months to document the visual side of body transformation. And in that time period, I'm becoming more educated and I'm understanding this like huge impact that my photos have for them to reflect back what they're going through physically and the physical changes. And so I don't really necessarily have a question, but I'm in a room full of potentially journalists and people that can help propel this story forward. So I just wanted to point this out. And unfortunately, Ashton can't be here to tell this story. So I appreciate all that you guys are doing and understanding more and more as someone who is Gen X and a 50-year-old. It's so enlightening to understand this broad spectrum of humanity and then be able to work in that realm of storytelling. Even though I'm not a writer, it's the photojournalist side of storytelling that I'm hoping to bring that forward with. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that one of the most important things is that we, look to all of the ways and that we can tell stories. Of course, and photojournalism is one of them. Any thoughts or advice, potentially?
I would just want to say that I would love to connect with you after because I think between the four of us we have a lot of connections in LGBTQ media, and I know plenty of editors, video producers who I think would be really interested in hearing a unique trans story about gender-affirming care presented in a way that I think most folks don't conventionally think about. So yeah, I would love to touch base with you later.
Also, just like, I can't think of anything more humanizing and beautiful than just like a photo essay on trans joy and affirmation, especially like through the angle that you're coming in through. I just think that, it is hard to miss it when you see trans joy. It is so infectious, and I love art and photo for that reason, because there is no denying it unless no denying it if you have a desire to see it.
Well, we have to end this panel at this particular time, but I just wanted to thank all of you all for all of your powerful and experience-informed insights, and also to everyone in the audience for joining us. Thank you so much.